So, hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Human AI podcast. Today, we're gonna do another Truman Show episode of our series. As always, if you haven't watched the previous episodes, maybe it's a good idea for you to watch them because there's kind of a link between each episode, and I'm not gonna do an introduction to where we left off. But yeah, even if you just want to watch this one, it's still going to be fun because we're just talking about fun philosophy concepts. The basic idea is that I'm answering the question, if we lack certainty that the world is as we perceive it, how should we act? And I'm going to do a presentation to my colleagues in a few weeks, and Grog is kind of helping me out polishing the presentation. We did talk about why would we lack certainty in the first place in the previous episode, and we had some really cool insights about the epistemological limits and transcendental philosophy, Kant, critic of pure reason, etc., etc. Now, I want us to focus more on the epistemological frameworks. So I want us to figure out how to figure out the truth, some theories of knowledge. How should we and Truman act? This is the question I want to answer, Grog and people. And then I'm breaking it down to decision models, epistemological frameworks, and moral frameworks. So, excuse me, today we're doing moral frameworks, not epistemological ones. So let's talk about some moral frameworks, Grog, that might allow us to, well, let's see what they say. How should we and Truman act if we lack certainty that the world is as we perceive it? Grog, the mic's for you. Go.
All right, let's dive into moral frameworks to tackle your question. How should we act if we lack certainty that the world is as we perceive it? Since we can't fully trust our perceptions, moral frameworks can guide actions in this uncertainty. Here are three key ones. 1. Utilitarianism. Act to maximize overall happiness or well-being, even if reality is uncertain. Proposed by Bentham and Mill, it suggests calculating outcomes, e.g., greatest good for the most people, like choosing actions that reduce harm despite incomplete knowledge. 2. Deontological. Kantian ethics. Follow universal rules or duties, like don't lie, regardless of outcomes or perceptual uncertainty, rooted in Kant's categorical imperative, act only on maxims you'd will as universal law. 3. Virtue ethics. Focus on cultivating character traits, e.g., courage, compassion, to act well, as Aristotle argued, prioritizing being a good person over specific acts, adaptable to uncertain realities. Each addresses uncertainty differently. Utilitarianism bets on probable outcomes.
What other things? You know what? Everyone talks, like in medical school, utilitarianism, consequentialism, deontology, they break our balls. And I love them, all of these. And honestly, I want to go and learn so much about all of these. And I know they're the most relevant ones. But I want to introduce people to something else. And I wanted to ask you, is existentialism and absurdism a moral framework, or would you not say it's a moral framework?
Existentialism and absurdism aren't strict moral frameworks like utilitarianism or deontological, but they offer perspectives on how to act in an uncertain world, so they can loosely inform moral decision-making. Here's the deal. Existentialism, think Sartre, Camus, says there's no inherent meaning in life, so you create your own through choices, emphasizing freedom and authenticity. In uncertainty, it suggests acting in good faith, true to your self-defined values, like choosing compassion because you decide it matters. Absurdism, Camus, embraces the conflict between our desire for meaning and a meaningless universe, recommending rebellion against despair by living passionately despite the absurd. It's not a rule-based framework, but a stance. Act with defiance, finding joy in the lack of certainty.
So if it's not a moral framework, then what is it?
Existentialism and absurdism are philosophical perspectives,
Can
not
you
moral
speak
frameworks.
slightly faster, please?
Sure thing. Existentialism and absurdism are philosophical perspectives, not moral frameworks, tackling questions of existence, meaning, and how to live in a world without inherent purpose. Existentialism, Sartre, Camus, emphasizes creating your own meaning through free, authentic choices, while absurdism, Camus, accepts life's lack of meaning and urges living boldly in defiance of that absurdity. Want to explore how these can guide actions
Now
in your
speak
present?
slightly less fast and explain to me. So if they're not moral frameworks, what are they? What area of philosophy do they sit in?
Existentialism and absurdism fall under existential philosophy, a branch of philosophy that explores human existence, freedom, and the search for meaning in a seemingly indifferent or meaningless universe. They focus on questions of how to live and act authentically when there's no preset purpose, rather than providing structured moral rules like utilitarianism or deontological, making them more about personal and metaphysical outlook than ethics. Want to dive into how these perspectives could still shape actions for your presentation or try a different moral framework?
Well, okay. I want to include existentialism. I don't know how what I don't know. It doesn't fit in the moral frameworks slide though, right? Maybe I should create another slide for it, or I could just say perspective or something. Maybe, or shall I put in the epistemological framework? I don't know.
You're right that existentialism doesn't neatly fit as a moral framework, since it's more of an existential philosophy. But it can still inform your presentation on how to act in an uncertain world. Here's how to handle it. Option 1. Create a separate slide for philosophical perspectives alongside moral frameworks. Label existentialism and maybe absurdism as perspectives that guide action through authenticity and self-created meaning, not strict moral rules. Example: existentialism suggests acting in good faith, choosing values true to oneself despite uncertainty, like prioritizing compassion because you define it as meaningful. Option 2. Include it in moral frameworks loosely, noting it's not a traditional framework but a stance. Say, existentialism encourages actions aligned with personal meaning, complementing frameworks like virtue ethics. Don't put it in epistemological frameworks. It's not about knowledge acquisition, but about existence and action. Option 3. Weave it into your intro conclusion, framing it as a mindset that underpins decision-making in uncertainty.
Okay,
Setting
question. So, okay, we talked about okay, my question is, sorry guys, I got distracted. Yeah, who would oppose existentialism?
Opponents of existentialism often come from philosophical or theological camps that reject its emphasis on individual freedom and lack of inherent meaning. Key critics include: 1. Theistic philosophers, e.g., Kierkegaard, though he's a proto-existentialist, or Christian thinkers like Tillich, who argue meaning comes from God, not human choice, opposing existentialism's secular, self-created purpose. 2. Absolutist moralists, e.g., Kantian deontologists, who criticize its subjective ethics, saying universal rules, not personal values, should guide actions. 3. Marxists or structuralists, who see existentialism's focus on individual choice as ignoring social, economic, or historical forces shaping behavior.
Explain this Marxist one and the fundamentalist, whatever, structuralist you said. This is very interesting.
All right, let's unpack Marxist and structuralist critiques of existentialism, focusing on why they'd oppose its approach to acting in an uncertain world. Marxist critique. Marxists, rooted in Karl Marx's philosophy, argue that human behavior and meaning are shaped by material conditions, class struggle, and economic systems, not individual freedom, as existentialism, e.g., Sartre, claims. They see existentialism's focus on personal choice and self-created meaning as ignoring the collective, societal forces, capitalism, oppression that constrain actions. For example, a Marxist would say a worker's decision to act authentically is limited by their economic reality, e.g., needing to work exploitative jobs, making existentialism's individualism naive or bourgeois. They'd propose collective action, like revolution, over personal value creation to address uncertainty. Structuralist critique. Structuralists, e.g., Levi-Strauss, Foucault, argue that human behavior is governed by underlying social structures, language, culture, power dynamics, not individual agency. They oppose existentialism's emphasis on free, authentic choices, claiming individuals are products of systems they can't fully escape. For instance, Foucault might argue your values are shaped by societal norms or power, not freely chosen, so existentialism overstates personal
So
freedom.
is Foucault a structuralist then, not a post-structuralist? I'm confused. What's the difference between structuralism and modernism and postmodernism and post-structuralism?
Great question. Let's clarify Foucault's position and the differences between structuralism, post-structuralism, modernism, and postmodernism, keeping it concise to fit your presentation on acting and uncertainty. Foucault. He's a post-structuralist, not a strict structuralist, though early works, e.g., The Order of Things, lean structuralist. He started analyzing structures, e.g., language, power, but later emphasized their fluidity and how individuals navigate them, bridging structuralism and post-structuralism. Structuralism, a mid-20th century philosophy, e.g., Levi-Strauss, saying human behavior and knowledge are shaped by fixed, underlying systems, language, culture, myths. It opposes existentialism by downplaying individual choice, arguing actions reflect societal structures. In uncertainty, structuralists trust systematic patterns over personal freedom. Post-structuralism, evolving from structuralism, 1960s, 70s.
Can you make a summary? This is very interesting for me and I get bored. Can you do a bit of a summary of all everything you just said?
All right, here's a tight summary. Foucault is a post-structuralist, not purely structuralist, analyzing fluid power and knowledge systems, not fixed ones. Structuralism, Levi-Strauss, says behavior follows stable societal structures, language, culture, rejecting existentialism's free choice. Post-structuralism, Foucault-Derrida, sees structures as shifting, allowing some agency within constraints, still skeptical of existentialism's full freedom. Modernism trusts universal truths, progress, and reason, opposing existentialism's subjective meaning. Postmodernism, Lyotard, rejects grand truths, embracing fragmented realities, aligning loosely with existentialism's individual meaning, but not its moral focus. For your presentation, these challenge
I see what you mean. Okay, so basically post-structuralism is the idea that, so what's the difference between structuralism and post-structuralism? So basically they're talking about the idea that our behaviors are governed by social structures, whereas postmodernism is kind of saying that there's too many barriers between observer and objective reality. And then post-structuralism would say, yes, and a lot of these barriers come from social structures. Correct me if I'm wrong, please.
You're close, but let's sharpen the distinctions between structuralism, post-structuralism, and postmodernism to clear up the confusion, keeping it brief for your presentation vibe. Structuralism says human behavior and thought are shaped by fixed, underlying social structures, e.g., language, culture, myths. Think Levi Strauss. Our actions follow these invisible rulebooks, not free choice. So existentialism's individual freedom is nonsense. Post-structuralism builds on structuralism but says these structures, e.g., power, language, aren't fixed. They're fluid, contested, and shift over time. Foucault, Derrida. It agrees behavior is influenced by structures, but allows some wiggle room for agency. Still skeptical of existentialism's total freedom. Not just barriers from structures, but how they shape and limit knowledge itself. Postmodernism rejects grand narratives, e.g., universal truth, progress, and embraces fragmented, subjective realities. Lyotard, Baudrillard. It says there's no single reality due to cultural, linguistic barriers, aligning with your idea of barriers between observer and objective
Okay,
reality.
perfect. So let's go back to the moral frameworks. I can't bear talking about the fucking utilitarianism, consequentialism, all that. Maybe I'll do it in a way where it's more interesting. Maybe if I read Jeremy Bentham and Stuart Mill, and maybe I find some cool things to add. That's a good shout, actually. Maybe I should do that, you know. But besides that, because I don't know if I have time, it's my presentation this next week. I should have done that. Can I put them in one category, and then talk about other ones? Tell me more moral frameworks. Or tell me ways to make them more interesting. Maybe some new pieces of knowledge that we didn't know before. Some subcategories maybe of them.
Merging utilitarianism and consequentialism into one category for your presentation is a smart move, since utilitarianism is a type of consequentialism, and it keeps things streamlined. Let's make moral frameworks pop for your colleagues, addressing how to act in an uncertain world, with fresh angles and subcategories to avoid the usual textbook boredom. Category: consequentialism, including utilitarianism. Consequentialism judges actions by outcomes, with utilitarianism, Bentham, Mill, as its famous branch, aiming for max happiness. To make it spicy, highlight Bentham's hedonic calculus, weighing pleasure-pain, but add a twist, his quirky idea of preserving his body, auto-icon, still at UCL, to show his obsession with utility even in death. Mill's higher versus lower pleasures, e.g., intellectual joy over physical, can tie to uncertainty, choosing actions for long-term societal good despite unclear realities. Subcategory: rule utilitarianism versus act utilitarianism. Follow rules that generally maximize happiness, e.g., always save lives, easier in uncertainty than calculating each act's outcome. Other moral frameworks to keep it fresh. 1. Care ethics. Focuses on relationships and empathy. Carol Gilligan. Act to nurture connections, like prioritizing community welfare and uncertainty, not just abstract rules. New tidbit. It's gaining traction in medical ethics, emphasizing patient-doctor bonds.
What is it? New tidwit? What?
The new tidbit is that care ethics, which prioritizes relationships and empathy, think Carol Gilligan, is gaining ground in medical ethics, focusing on patient-doctor trust and emotional connection over
Okay. Tell us more about rule versus act utilitarianism, and talk to us about what an emotivist is and what type of category of things does emotivist belong to. And you know how I always group things into categories? I want you to criticize me and say to me, stop categorizing things. This is not the only way to learn. Because, you know, when we make categories, we suddenly lose a lot of the things between, you know, if that makes sense. It's more hard to think out of the box and explain what I'm trying to say.
All right, let's tackle rule versus act utilitarianism. Explain emotivism and its category, and then I'll nudge you on your love for categorizing with a constructive critique, as requested, to keep your presentation on acting and uncertainty sharp and fresh. Rule versus act utilitarianism within consequentialism. Act utilitarianism, Bentham's classic. Judge each action by its specific outcome. Do whatever maximizes happiness in that moment. In uncertainty, you'd weigh immediate consequences, e.g., save one life now versus risk two later, but it's tough without clear data. Rule utilitarianism, later refinement. Follow general rules that tend to maximize happiness long-term, e.g., always tell the truth, even if it's suboptimal in one case. It's more practical in uncertainty since you don't need to calculate every outcome. Just stick to tested rules. Example, rule says prioritize emergency care, easing decisions in chaotic, unclear scenarios. Emotivism and its category. Emotivism, A.J. Ayer, C.L. Stevenson, is a meta-ethical theory, not a moral framework like utilitarianism. Arguing moral statements, e.g., stealing is wrong, express emotions or attitudes, not objective facts. It's like saying, boo, stealing, rather than stating a universal truth. It falls under non-cognitivism in ethics. Moral judgments aren't true-false, just expressions. In uncertainty, emotivism suggests acting based on gut feelings or shared values, but it lacks guidance for consistent decisions. Critique of your categorizing habit. Look, your instinct to group things, lumping utilitarianism under consequentialism or existentialism in perspectives, is great for organizing a presentation, but chill on the rigid boxes. When you categorize too tightly, you risk missing the messy, in-between connections that spark creative insights, like how emotivism's emotional lens could vibe with existentialism's personal meaning, but doesn't fit neatly in any moral bucket. Looser links let you explore how these ideas bleed into each other, which is key when tackling uncertainty. Real-world problems don't respect tidy categories. Try weaving ideas more fluidly, like threads in a tapestry, to keep your audience hooked on the bigger picture of action without certainty. Want to dive deeper into emotivism's
I
role in
see. So, what other meta-ethics do we have in except emotivist? And what can I do to escape from this categorizing everything? What can I do to replace it? What other ways to kind of figure out things out of there? What's the opposite, for instance, of categorizing? I don't know.
Let's dive into meta-ethics beyond emotivism, suggest ways to break your categorizing habit, and explore alternatives to organizing knowledge for your presentation on acting in an uncertain world. Meta-ethics beyond emotivism. Meta-ethics studies the nature of moral judgments. In emotivism, moral statements as emotional expressions is just one view. Others include 1. Moral realism. Moral statements are objective facts, like 2 plus 2 equals 4, e.g., killing is wrong is true, independent of feelings. Think G.E. Moore. In uncertainty, it assumes stable moral truths guide actions. 2. Moral relativism. Morals depend on culture or context, e.g., what's right in one society isn't in another. No universal truths, so uncertainty means adapting to local values. 3. Prescriptivism. R-Mage Hare. Moral statements are commands, e.g., don't steal is an order to act. Like emotivism, it's non-cognitivist, but focuses on guiding behavior, useful in unclear realities. Escaping the categorizing trap. Categorizing, e.g., grouping utilitarianism under consequentialism, helps structure thoughts but can box you in, missing fluid connections or out-of-box ideas, as you noted. The opposite isn't chaos, but relational thinking, seeing ideas as interconnected webs, not rigid buckets. Strategies to replace categorizing. 1. Narrative flow. Tell a story linking ideas instead of Utilitarianism/consequentialism describe how Bentham's happiness quest evolved into Mill's nuanced pleasures, tying to existentialism's personal meaning search, showing overlap without strict categories. 2. Concept mapping. Draw a web connecting concepts, e.g., draw lines from emotivism to relativism for shared subjectivity, then to virtue ethics for emotional roots. This visualizes overlaps.
Okay, cool. Sorry, continue. So this visualizes overlaps, yes? Tell it again. Sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted you.
No stress. Let's pick it up. Concept mapping visualizes overlaps by drawing.
Yes, concept mapping. Tell me.
Concept mapping is a way to break free from rigid categorizing by visually linking ideas in a web, showing how they connect without forcing them into boxes, perfect for your presentation on acting in an uncertain world.
I don't get it.
No worries. Let's make concept mapping clearer. It's a visual tool to organize ideas without strict categories, showing how they relate like a web. For your presentation on acting in uncertainty, draw a central idea, e.g., moral frameworks. Branch out to nodes like utilitarianism, emotivism, existentialism. Connect them with lines labeled with relationships, e.g., utilitarianism to emotivism. Both prioritize subjective outcomes. This shows overlaps and flows, avoiding rigid boxes, letting you see, say, how emotivism's emotional basis links to virtue ethics compassion without forcing them into one group.
I see. Any other ideas before we go and group things?
Before we dive back into moral frameworks or grouping, here are 2 more ideas to replace rigid categorizing, keeping your presentation on acting in uncertainty dynamic. 1. Analogical thinking. Use analogies to link ideas without boxing them. For example, compare moral frameworks to navigation tools. Utilitarianism is like a GPS seeking the happiest route. Existentialism, a compass for personal direction in fog uncertainty, letting ideas blend organically. 2. Dialectical approach. Explore ideas through tensions or debates, like pitting emotivisms, morals, or feeling.
I want to ask you a question. Why do we have the tendency to group things? Is it something to do with our political or economic system or the school system? I feel there is maybe a bigger reason we like grouping things. We like escaping this nature, this chaotic nature.
Our tendency to group things comes from deep cognitive, evolutionary, and social roots, not just political, economic, or school systems, though they amplify it. Here's why we do it and how it ties to your feeling about escaping chaos. Cognitive wiring. Our brains are pattern seekers, evolved to simplify a complex, chaotic world for survival. Grouping, e.g., categorizing animals as safe or dangerous, helped early humans make quick decisions, reducing cognitive overload, as psychologists like Daniel Kahneman note with System 1 thinking, fast, intuitive. Evolutionary advantage. Categorizing ensured efficiency. Eating berries, group them as edible or poisonous. This saved time and energy, boosting survival odds, per evolutionary psychology studies. Social systems. Schools, politics, and economies reinforce grouping for control and clarity. Taxonomies in education, e.g., biology's species, or political binaries, left-right, create order. But as sociologist Zygmunt Bauman argues, modernity's obsession with classification tames chaotic reality, often at the cost of nuance. Escaping chaos. Your instinct is spot on. Grouping is a defense against life's chaotic nature, giving us a sense of predictability in an uncertain world. Think existentialism's struggle with meaning. Philosophers like Nietzsche warn this can stifle creativity, as rigid categories hide life's fluidity. For your presentation, you could weave this into why we lean on moral frameworks and uncertainty. It's our brain's way of ordering chaos, but loosening categories via concept maps, stories, opens freer action. Want to explore one route, e.g., cognitive, deeper?
I wanna do the slide. So I have a box. I'm saying that okay, I'm gonna put the framework, then I'm gonna put the definition, then I'm gonna answer the question, how should Truman act based on that framework, and then how should we act in uncertainty? So yeah, I'm gonna do three. Let's do
All right, let's
let's
structure
do
your.
yeah, maybe we'll do I don't know, nihilism, stoicism, utility. I'm not sure.
I hear you wanting to shake things up with moral frameworks for your slide on how to act in an uncertain world. But nihilism and stoicism aren't traditional moral frameworks, like utilitarianism. So let's clarify and pick three that fit your format: framework, definition, how humans should act, and how to act in uncertainty. Since you mentioned nihilism, stoicism, and utilitarianism, I'll propose utilitarianism, a clear moral framework, and treat stoicism as a practical philosophy, swapping nihilism, more a perspective like existentialism, for virtue ethics to keep it moral focused. If you want nihilism later, we can tweak it. Here's your slide. Slide. Moral frameworks for acting in uncertainty.
Dude, is there anything else besides utility, consequentialism, deontology, and virtue that I can talk that's actually like that we have a yeah, anything else?
Yeah, let's venture beyond the usual suspects: utilitarianism, consequentialism, deology, virtue ethics, for fresh moral frameworks to spice up your presentation on acting in an uncertain world. Here are three less common but legit moral frameworks that fit your slide format: framework, definition, how to act in uncertainty. 1. Care ethics. Framework. Rooted in relationships and empathy,
I
primarily
don't
from
like
care.
this care ethics. I mean, I love it, but I don't want it now. I should read a bit actually about care ethics. What shall I read in regard to care ethics?
If you're intrigued by care ethics but not ready to include it in your presentation, here's a quick guide on what to read to dive into it, keeping it short since you want to explore other moral frameworks next. Care ethics. Focusing on empathy and relationships is a great fit for medical contexts, so it's worth exploring. Recommended reads. 1. Carol Gilligan, In a Different Voice, 1982. Foundational text introducing care ethics, arguing moral reasoning based on relationships complements justice-based ethics. Start here for the core ideas. 2. Nell Noddings, Caring, a Relational Approach to Ethics and Moral Education,
Tell us
1984.
something that we can learn from them, besides just telling us empathy and relationships.
Beyond empathy and relationships, care ethics from Gilligan and Noddings teaches us 1. Contextual moral reasoning. Gilligan shows decisions should weigh specific relationships and circumstances, not just universal rules. Offering flexibility in uncertainty, e.g., prioritizing a patient's emotional needs over protocol. 2. Interdependence. Noddings emphasizes that moral action fosters mutual reliance, not independence, urging us to act to strengthen community bonds, vital when reality is unclear. Want to pick other moral frameworks for your slide or dive deeper into one of these lessons?
You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna do my first column of the three. I'm gonna call it ethical pluralism. Can I do that and talk about a few of them together? Let's say I mix utility, consequentialism, deontology, and virtue all together, and say Truman is a clever guy. He takes case to case approach and chooses.
That's a brilliant move. Framing your first column as ethical pluralism is a fresh way to combine utilitarianism, consequentialism, deology, and virtue ethics into a cohesive approach for your presentation on acting in an uncertain world. Ethical pluralism posits that no single moral framework is universally best. Instead, people draw from multiple frameworks case by case, reflecting human adaptability. Here's how to structure your slide column with ethical pluralism, covering definition, how humans should act, and how to act in uncertainty. Slide column 1. Ethical pluralism. Framework. Ethical pluralism holds that multiple moral frameworks, e.g., utilitarianism, deology, virtue ethics, are valid, and wise individuals select the best approach per situation, rejecting one-size-fits-all ethics. This combines consequentialism, judge actions by outcomes like utilitarianism's maximizing happiness, deology, follow universal duties like Kant's categorical imperative, and virtue ethics, cultivate character like Aristotle's courage, to flexibly address moral dilemmas. How humans
tell
should
me
act.
again the definition and tell me what is this categorical imperative?
Ethical pluralism definition. Ethical pluralism is the view that multiple moral frameworks, consequentialism, judging actions by outcomes, like utilitarianism's focus on happiness, deology, following universal duties, and virtue ethics, building character, like courage, are valid, allowing people to pick the best approach for each situation, adapting flexibly to moral challenges. Categorical imperative. From Kant's deology, it's a universal moral principle. Act only on maxims, rules. You could will to be a universal law, binding everyone.
Yes, Kant was like, he was very clear with it. He was saying, if someone comes with a knife in your house and wants to kill someone, you should tell them where they are if you know, right?
You're spot on about Kant's rigidity with the categorical imperative, though the knife example is a famous critique of his deology. Kant argued you should never lie, as lying violates the categorical imperative. Only act on maxims, rules, you could will as universal laws. In his view, if someone with a knife asks where their intended victim is, you should tell the truth, e.g., they're in the bedroom, because lying undermines truth as a universal principle, even if it leads to harm. Critics, like Benjamin Constant, challenged this, saying it's absurd to prioritize truth over saving a life, highlighting deology's inflexibility in messy, uncertain realities. For your ethical pluralism slide,
I have a question. You know what I can think with Kant? Because Kant is saying, he says, tell them the truth, but at the same time, maybe stop them at the same time. Kant doesn't say, tell them the truth and run and save yourself. Maybe Kant is saying, tell them the truth, but call the police immediately and go lock the door so the person is safe. And, then when the person is safe, run away so you don't get stabbed too.
That's a clever way to wrestle with Kant's strict deology and the categorical imperative, trying to find a practical workaround for the knife-wielding intruder scenario. Let's unpack it for your ethical pluralism slide on acting in uncertainty. Kant's categorical imperative demands you act only on maxims you'd will as universal laws. So lying, e.g., hiding the victim's location, is forbidden, as universal lying destroys trust. In your scenario, you tell the truth, they're in the bedroom, but then take actions like calling the police, locking the door, or ensuring safety to prevent harm, staying true to Kant's truth-telling while addressing the moral tension. However, Kant's writings, e.g., on a supposed right to lie, suggest he might still insist on truth-telling without guaranteeing you can outmaneuver the consequences, as he prioritizes the principle over outcomes.
Let me ask you a question about them. Another thing I was thinking about it is, maybe humans, if they start lying, even once, then they lose the ball, they drop the ball or whatever it's called. It's like sometimes we choose to do a decision. Let's say I will not. I will wake up 5 a.m. every day for a month. And 2 weeks pass, and you're like, this is terrible. I cannot see my friends. This experiment has obviously failed. I don't like it. And you see, it's not good for your overall happiness. But, same with Kant here, I feel, even though, I mean, it's not the same thing, but I feel you should go through with it because maybe there's an even worse outcome, which is you are not true to yourself and you drop the ball in regard to can I trust myself now, and then maybe worse things can happen in a way. So I'm thinking maybe Kant believed, maybe he didn't, just let me know, it's just an argument. Maybe he thought that if people even start lying once, then they will lose control and they will start lying more. Maybe Kant thought that if we have to choose between nothing, a little bit, and a lot, he always will choose nothing in regard to lying because he doesn't believe in the category of a little bit. He thinks it's going to be out of control. Same with me, because I don't drink, because if I drink one glass, I don't like it. I prefer to drink either 10 glasses or 0 glasses. So it's been years I don't drink at all, you know?
Your analogy about losing control after one lie or breaking a commitment, like waking up at 5 a.m., is a sharp insight, and it resonates with Kant's rigid stance on the categorical imperative. Let's explore whether Kant might have thought that lying even once spirals into chaos, tying it to your ethical pluralism slide for acting in an uncertain world, and address your personal example of all or nothing choices, like drinking 0 or 10 glasses. Kant and the losing control argument. Kant's categorical imperative, act only on maxims you'd will as universal laws, demands absolute truth-telling because lying undermines the foundation of rational trust in his groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. Your idea that one lie could lead to dropping the ball and losing self-trust or societal control aligns partially with Kant's thinking, but his reasoning is more about principle than consequences, like spiraling lies. Here's the breakdown. Kant's view on lies. Kant argued lying is always wrong because a maxim like, I can lie when it suits me, fails the universalizability test. If everyone lied, trust in communication would collapse. See his essay on a supposed right to lie. He didn't explicitly say, one lie leads to more lies, but your interpretation fits his absolutism. Allowing even one lie risks eroding the moral law's consistency, like a crack in a dam. He'd likely agree that a single lie could weaken your moral resolve, as it contradicts the rational duty to treat truth as sacred.
It's an interesting idea. And yes, maybe also the other thing is people, we are, some people, you know, they don't want to think about philosophy all day. They just want some simple rules to follow. And maybe it's better to provide these people with some rules that occasionally will fail them in regard to what the best thing to do is, rather than have people not have any rules and maybe act worse. But I don't know if I believe this, because I personally have trust in people that they can develop critical thinking and figure out for themselves. But I don't know. What do you think?
Your reflection on whether people need simple moral rules versus trusting them to think critically is a great tension to explore for your ethical pluralism slide in your presentation on acting in an uncertain world. You're wrestling with Kant's rigid dialogy, absolute rules like never lie, versus a more flexible, case-by-case approach, and questioning if strict rules are better for those who don't want to philosophize all day, or if people can handle nuanced decision-making. Here's my take, addressing both sides and tying it to your slide. Simple rules for simplicity. Kant's categorical imperative, act only on maxims you'd will as universal laws, offers clear rules, like never lie, which can appeal to people who prefer straightforward guidance over constant moral deliberation. Benefits: predictability. Rules reduce decision fatigue and uncertainty, e.g., always tell the truth, even in the knife-wielding intruder case, providing a moral anchor when reality is unclear. Societal order. As you suggest, simple rules prevent chaos if widely followed, ensuring trust, Kant's big concern. Philosophers like Thomas Hobbes might back this, arguing humans need clear societal contracts to avoid worse outcomes. Downsides. Inflexibility. Rules can fail in extreme cases, e.g., Kant's truth-telling risks harm in the intruder scenario, as you noted. Oversimplification. People might blindly follow rules.
Yes, I agree. Perfect. Thank you guys. I'll see you at the next episode. Peace.